He stepped out onto the cold, metallic surface of the station, his boots making a quiet thud as he walked forward. A tall, imposing figure stood at the end of the hall, waiting for him. She wore an elegant gown of shimmering blue that seemed to ripple with a life of its own. Her features were striking, tall, with pale skin that almost seemed to glow in the soft light of the station. Her eyes, however, were what caught his attention. They were an eerie shade of violet, the color of deep space, and they seemed to pierce through him, seeing straight into his soul. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. This was her, the Xelian queen Althara. He had heard rumors of her beauty, but seeing her in person was another matter entirely. She was like nothing he had ever seen. "Welcome, human," she said, her voice soft but commanding. The words seemed to echo in his mind, and for a moment, Jonathan felt a shiver run down his spine. It wasn't just the tone of her voice. It was the way she said it, as if she already knew everything about him, as if she had already read his thoughts before he even spoke them. "Your Majesty," Jonathan said, bowing his head slightly in respect. His voice came out a little too shaky, but he couldn't help it. He was nervous. He had always prided himself on his ability to stay composed under pressure. But this was different. This was Althara. This was a being whose mind-reading abilities were legendary. "I'm honored to be here," Jonathan said, trying to steady his breath. Althara smiled, and it was as if the entire room lit up. "The honor is mine, human," she said. "Please come."
"I have prepared a space for our discussions." She turned gracefully and began walking down the hallway.
Jonathan followed, trying to control his thoughts. It was harder than he expected. He kept telling himself to stay calm, but his mind kept racing. What if she could read his thoughts? What if she knew he was afraid? As they entered the chamber where the negotiations would take place, Jonathan couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. The room was magnificent, an enormous circular space with tall glass windows looking out into the void of space. At the center was a long table, at which several other Xelians were already seated. Althara motioned for him to sit at one end, and he did so, his mind still churning with anxiety. He tried to focus on the task at hand. He was here to negotiate, not to be distracted by his own fears. The peace talks had already been delayed too many times, and the future of Earth depended on this moment. If he failed here, it could mean the end of the fragile alliance they had been working to build with the Xelians. But no matter how much he tried to concentrate, he couldn't shake the feeling that Althara was watching him. Truly watching him, not just with her eyes, but with her mind. Althara's voice cut through his thoughts. "Tell me, human, why do you look so anxious?" Jonathan froze, his heart skipping a beat. How could she know? He hadn't said anything. He hadn't shown any signs of nervousness. He had tried to keep his mind focused on the task at hand, but somehow, Althara had already known. He stammered, but his words failed him. He couldn't lie to her. It was as if she had already read every part of him, every fear, every doubt. His mind felt exposed, naked in front of her, and it was terrifying. Althara smiled again, her violet eyes gleaming with a knowing look. "You needn't be afraid, human," she said. "I can read your thoughts, yes, but it is not my intention to hurt you." Her voice was soothing, but there was something in her words that sent another chill down his spine. "I only wish to understand." Jonathan swallowed hard, trying to regain his composure. "Understand?" he repeated. "Understand what?" Her gaze softened and she leaned forward slightly. "Your thoughts, your feelings, your fears." Jonathan's face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. He didn't want her to know what was in his mind. He didn't want anyone to know how terrified he was. But it was clear that Althara wasn't going to stop. She didn't have to ask permission. She already knew everything about him. And what's worse, he didn't know how to hide it. I'm not hiding anything," he said quickly, trying to sound confident, but it came out sounding like a plea. Althara tilted her head, as if she found his attempt to defend himself amusing. "Human, you cannot hide from me," she said softly, her voice almost affectionate. "I can hear your thoughts as clearly as I hear my own. You don't need to try to shield yourself from me." Jonathan felt a lump form in his throat. He had never felt so exposed in his life. He had always been able to control what people saw in him, what they thought of him. But here, in front of Althara, everything was laid bare. Every worry, every insecurity, every little doubt he had was open for her to see, and she was smiling. Smiling as though it didn't matter. "You should not fear me, human," she said, her voice gentle. "I am not here to invade your privacy. I am here to understand." Jonathan's heart beat loudly in his chest as he tried to gather his thoughts. How could she understand? How could she truly understand what it was like to be human, to live with all the complexities and contradictions that made up a person's mind? But Althara wasn't done yet. She leaned back in her chair, her violet eyes never leaving him. "Do you understand, Jonathan Pierce, that I already know everything about you? I know your fears, your desires, your hopes. There is nothing you can hide from me. But that is not why I am here." Jonathan swallowed again, his throat dry. "Why? Why are you here?" Althara's smile widened, and for the first time, Jonathan saw a hint of something else in her eyes. Something that wasn't just a queen's curiosity. It was something deeper, more personal. "I am here because I wish to understand you," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. Jonathan's mind raced as he tried to process her words. There was something more to this. She wasn't just here to read his mind for the sake of it. There was something about him, something that intrigued her, and he couldn't quite grasp what it was. For the first time since they had met, Jonathan felt a strange flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about power. Maybe, just maybe, it was about something else entirely. But before he could ask her anything further, Althara stood up, her figure tall and graceful.
"Let us begin the discussions," she said, her voice commanding. "I will show you how to navigate the path to peace.
Together, we will understand each other." Jonathan followed her lead, his heart still pounding in his chest, but with a new sense of determination. The peace talks had begun, and so, too, had his journey into the depths of a mind that could never be hidden from him. The days passed quickly aboard the Zillion space station, and Jonathan Pierce found himself deep within negotiations that were more complicated than he had ever imagined. At first it seemed as though everything was going well. The Zillions appeared interested in peace, and the discussions were progressing smoothly. But that was before he truly understood the power Althara wielded. Each time they met, Jonathan found himself more and more unsettled. Every word that left his lips, every move he made, felt like it was being dissected, not just by Althara's sharp eyes, but by her mind. He had become increasingly aware of her ability to read his thoughts. It wasn't something he could ignore. She seemed to know when he was nervous, when he was lying, even when he was hiding something from her. And yet, she never said anything. Instead, she would smile, that knowing smile, and continue as if nothing was wrong. It was maddening. Jonathan was used to control. As a diplomat, he had spent years honing his ability to remain composed, to hide his emotions, and to think carefully before speaking. But with Althara, none of that seemed to matter. She knew everything before he even said a word. It was as though there was no boundary between his mind and hers. And it terrified him. The peace talks were delicate. Earth had been at war with several other races, and the Zillions were powerful enough to tip the balance of power in the galaxy. The alliance with the Xyleans could mean salvation for Earth, but if he failed, it could lead to disaster. Jonathan knew the stakes were high, but he also understood that the real test wasn't going to be in the negotiations. It was going to be in his ability to trust Althara. He didn't want to trust her. She was too powerful. Too invasive. Every time she spoke, it was as if she was speaking directly to his soul, reading him in ways no one ever could. He wondered how long he could keep up the facade of calm before his thoughts gave him away entirely. But that wasn't all. There was something about Alfara that made him uneasy, in ways he couldn't quite explain. Her beauty was otherworldly, yes, but it was more than that. It was her presence. There was something deep in her eyes, a knowledge that seemed to go beyond mere understanding. It was as if she could see through him, into the very core of who he was. One evening, after another exhausting round of talks, Jonathan found himself alone in his quarters, his mind racing.
He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong.
He had seen her again today, Alfara, sitting across from him, her eyes locked on his as if she could peer directly into his mind. It wasn't just her telepathic powers. It was the way she carried herself, her control, her patience. She was always in control, and Jonathan was starting to wonder if he ever had any control to begin with. The door to his room opened without warning. Jonathan turned, surprised to see Alfara standing there, her figure silhouetted against the bright lights of the hallway.
"Alfara," Jonathan said, standing up. "What are you doing here?" She stepped into the room without waiting for permission, her eyes never leaving his.
"I came to speak with you, Jonathan," she said softly, her voice both calming and unnerving. "There are things that need to be addressed."
What did she mean? What did she know? He forced himself to remain calm, to hide his unease. "What is it?" "I have read your thoughts," she said, her tone measured and calm.
"I know you are hiding something."
Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to deny it, to push back, but he couldn't. She was right. She always was.
"I'm not hiding anything," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm here to ensure peace between our people." "You are hiding your true feelings, Jonathan. You are afraid of me."
He could feel his thoughts slipping, his control over them slowly diminishing. She could see it in his eyes, in the way he was reacting. She was right. He was afraid of her. He was afraid of what she might do with all the knowledge she had of him. Afraid that, in the end, he wouldn't be able to protect Earth from whatever hidden agenda these Ileans might have. "I'm not afraid of you," Jonathan said, though his voice trembled slightly.
"I'm just trying to do my job." Alfara's smile widened, but there was no malice in it. "You can't hide behind that mask forever, Jonathan."
"I know your heart. I know your fear.
I know your desires. You cannot lie to me." Jonathan felt a deep sense of dread settle over him. How could he possibly negotiate peace if Alfara already knew everything? She knew his thoughts before he could even form them. She knew his deepest fears, his insecurities. She could read him like an open book. But even as that fear clawed at him, there was a part of him that was intrigued. How could someone be so perfect in their understanding? Alfara wasn't just powerful. She was kind, gentle even. She had shown no signs of cruelty despite knowing everything about him. That part of her was what Jonathan didn't understand. It confused him. "What do you want from me?" he asked, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Alfara stepped closer, her presence overwhelming, her violet eyes gazing deep into his. "I want you to trust me," she said softly.
I want you to understand that my ability to read your mind is not meant to hurt you. It is meant to help you."
Jonathan stared at her, searching her face for any sign of deception, but all he saw was honesty. It was strange. He had expected her to be cold, distant, and manipulative. Yet she was warm, caring even. He had expected to feel violated, exposed, but instead it felt like she was simply present, understanding. "How can you expect me to trust you?" Jonathan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How can I trust someone who can read my every thought?" Alfara looked at him for a long moment, her gaze softening. "Trust is not about hiding your thoughts, Jonathan. It is about being open to each other.
I do not wish to control you. I wish to understand you.
To work together. Jonathan felt his resolve weaken. Was she telling the truth? Was she really trying to help? Or was this just another layer of manipulation? He couldn't tell. You have a choice, Jonathan, Alfara said, her voice now firm but gentle. You can continue to hide behind your walls, afraid of what I might see. Or you can choose to be open.
You can choose to trust me.
Jonathan's mind raced. There it was again, her ability to speak directly to his core. He couldn't deny the power in her words. He could continue pretending, continue hiding, but in the end, would that really lead to peace? Would that really help Earth? In the silence that followed, Jonathan made a decision. He would trust her. He had to. If there was any hope for Earth, for the future, it lay in that trust.
I will trust you, he said, his voice firm now. But you must promise me one thing. And what is that? That you will never use your power against me, that you will never use it to manipulate or control.
I will trust you, but I will not allow myself to be a puppet. A flicker of something. Perhaps amusement, perhaps admiration, passed through her eyes. I give you my word, Jonathan Pierce. Your mind will be your own.
I will not control you.
Jonathan nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first time since he arrived, he felt a sense of relief, a weight lifting from his shoulders.
He didn't know if he had made the right decision, but he knew it was the only choice he had.
And with that, the negotiations continued. But now there was something different between them. A bond had been formed, fragile but real. And though the future was uncertain, Jonathan knew one thing for sure. He would never be the same again. The following days aboard the Zelian space station felt different. Jonathan had made the decision to trust Alfara, and while that decision brought a sense of relief, it also carried a weight of uncertainty. It wasn't as if he could forget the power she held over him. Her ability to read his thoughts, to know his every fear and desire before he could even express them. But now, there was a strange sense of peace that came with knowing that her intentions were not to control him. She had promised that she would never use her telepathic abilities to manipulate him. And for the first time since their meeting, Jonathan found himself wondering if there was more to Alfara than just the powerful queen who ruled a galaxy-spanning empire. Despite the peace that had settled over him, the pressure of the negotiations remained. The delicate talks between Earth and the Xyleans had reached a critical point. The stakes were high, too high. The treaty would either bring a new era of peace or lead to the downfall of both civilizations. Jonathan couldn't shake the fear that, despite his trust in Alfara, the outcome was still uncertain. It wasn't just the peace talks that weighed on him. It was the growing connection between him and the Queen. Every moment spent with her felt like a step closer to something he couldn't quite define. One evening after another intense round of discussions, Jonathan found himself alone in his quarters once again. The station's quiet hum filled the air, a constant reminder of how far from Earth he truly was. The stars outside the window seemed distant, almost unreachable. He had always dreamed of exploring space, but never in a way like this, never with the fate of Earth hanging in the balance. He sat on the edge of his bed, his thoughts swirling. He had spent so many years in diplomacy, working in control rooms, negotiating with world leaders, trying to keep his emotions in check. But none of that preparation had prepared him for Alfara. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. Her power, her grace, her wisdom. But there was something else, something deeper. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Come in," he called, his voice betraying a trace of uncertainty. The door slid open, and there she stood. Alfara. Her presence filled the room, not just with her beauty, but with an undeniable aura of calm. She was dressed in a simple, flowing gown, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "Jonathan," she said, her voice warm and inviting, yet carrying an undercurrent of something more.
"May I speak with you?"
Jonathan nodded, motioning for her to sit. She crossed the room gracefully and seated herself across from him. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, Jonathan felt as though she could see straight through him, as if the very depths of his thoughts were laid bare before her. He quickly pushed the feeling aside.
"I thought we could talk,"
Althara continued, her voice gentle.
About the treaty.
About us. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure what she meant by us, but he could sense the weight of her words.
"Of course," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "What do you want to talk about?"
She studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful.
"You have trusted me," she said, "but there is more to this than just the treaty."
"There is something between us, Jonathan. A connection."
"I feel it too."
He had tried to ignore it, tried to push aside the strange sense of closeness he felt whenever he was around her. But now, hearing her say it, he couldn't deny it any longer. There was a connection. He had felt it from the moment they first met, but he hadn't understood it. He hadn't wanted to.
I don't know what to say,"
Jonathan replied, his voice thick with emotion.
"I never expected any of this."
"I came here to negotiate, to ensure the safety of Earth. I never imagined I'd find myself in the middle of something like this." Althara's gaze softened.
"Neither did I," she said quietly. "But here we are."
"And I want you to know that I do not take your trust lightly. I understand your fears, your hesitation. I can feel them in your mind. But I also know that there is more to you than just the diplomat, the man who hides behind his walls." Jonathan looked away, suddenly feeling exposed. It wasn't that he was ashamed of who he was, but he had spent his entire life building these walls to protect himself, walls that Althara could easily tear down with a single glance. He had always been the one in control, the one who held the power in negotiations, but with her, he felt vulnerable, and it was terrifying. "I don't know how to do this," Jonathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do I trust you when everything I've ever known tells me to protect myself?" Her touch was warm, reassuring.
You don't have to hide from me, Jonathan, she said softly.
"I know you are afraid. I know you are unsure."
But I am not here to hurt you. I am here to understand you.
"To work with you." There was no trickery in her eyes, no hidden agenda, just honesty. She wasn't trying to control him, wasn't trying to manipulate him. She was simply offering him the chance to be vulnerable, to be seen for who he truly was. He took a deep breath, allowing himself to feel her presence, to feel the weight of her words. "I want to believe you," he said quietly.
"I do."
"But it's hard. I've spent so long building this armor around myself, I don't know if I can let it down."
You don't have to let it all down at once," Althara said gently. "Just take one step."
"That's all I ask." Jonathan nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't going to be easy. He wasn't going to wake up tomorrow and suddenly be free of his fears. But for the first time since arriving at the space station, he felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for him to let go, to trust, to be open. And that was a start. "I'll try," he said, his voice steadying.
"I'll try to trust you, to let go of the fear."
Althara smiled, a small, encouraging smile. "That is all I ask." They sat in silence for a few moments, the quiet stretching between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, though. It was peaceful. Jonathan could feel the tension in his body start to melt away. Althara's presence had a calming effect on him, one he didn't understand, but welcomed all the same. Finally, Althara stood, her movements graceful as ever.
"The peace talks are reaching their final stages," she said. "Tomorrow, we will begin the most important part.
The treaty will be signed." Jonathan stood as well, meeting her gaze. "I know," he said. "I'm ready. I don't want to fail."
"You won't fail," Alfara said softly. "Not if you trust yourself."
"Not if you trust me." Jonathan nodded, his heart beating more steadily now. "Oh, I'll trust you." Alfara's smile deepened, and she placed her hand on his shoulder briefly. "Then we will succeed together." As she left the room, Jonathan stood by the window, staring out at the stars.
The fear was still there, lurking in the back of his mind, but now it was tempered with something else. Something new. Hope. For the first time in a long while, Jonathan felt like he wasn't alone in this. Alfara had offered him her trust, and now it was up to him to take the next step. He had made the choice to trust her, and with that choice came the possibility of something more, something beyond the negotiations, beyond the treaty, something personal. As he watched the stars drift by, Jonathan couldn't help but wonder where this path would lead him. But for the first time, he felt a sense of calm, a sense of peace, and he knew deep down that whatever happened next, he wasn't walking it alone. The final day of negotiations arrived, and the air was thick with tension. Jonathan Pierce stood in front of the large glass windows of his quarters, staring out at the stars. His mind was racing, full of the weight of the responsibility he carried. Today would decide the fate of the peace treaty. He could feel it, the pressure, the burden of ensuring that Earth would have a future. The treaty with the Xylians was more than just an agreement. It was their chance at survival, their chance at a future where both species could live in harmony. Jonathan had spent sleepless nights worrying about what would happen if the talks failed. He had feared that despite everything, despite his best efforts, the Xylians might not agree to the terms. He had feared that Alfara, despite her kindness, might be playing a game he couldn't understand, that she might be manipulating him for some unknown purpose. But now, as he stood there in the quiet of the station, those fears seemed distant. They seemed less important. He had come to realize something in the past few days, something that had shifted within him. Alfara had shown him a side of herself that no one had expected. Her ability to read his thoughts, her penetrating gaze that had once terrified him, had become something else. It had become a tool for connection, not control. She had kept her promise, never using her power against him, never once trying to manipulate him. She had always been honest, always been genuine. Jonathan was no longer afraid. Not of her. Not of the Xylians. The fear that had once consumed him was gone. He had learned to trust, both in himself and in her. The door to his quarters slid open, and Alfara entered. She was dressed in her ceremonial robes, the colors of the Xylian Empire shimmering in the light. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there, sharing the quiet understanding that had grown between them over the past few days. "You're ready," Alfara said softly, her voice full of warmth. Jonathan nodded. "I think so," he said.
"I've never been more ready." She stepped closer, her presence filling the room, but it wasn't oppressive.
It was comforting, as though he wasn't alone in this moment.
"You done well, Giant."
More than I ever imagined you could. Jonathan felt a surge of gratitude, mixed with a sense of pride. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said. Alfara smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes.
"We've done this together,"
she replied. There was no need for more words. The connection between them was enough. They had both worked for this moment, fought for it in their own ways. But now it was time for the final step. They walked together down the hall to the grand chamber where the final meeting would take place. The room was vast, with towering walls of glass that offered a breathtaking view of the stars. Representatives from both Earth and the Zelian Empire were already seated at the long table, their faces solemn and expectant. Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest as he took his seat at the table, opposite Althera. The Zelian council members and Earth's delegates filled the space around them. It was an intimidating gathering, but Jonathan felt something he hadn't expected. Confidence. He had come this far, and now it was time to finish what they had started. The ceremony began. Formal and precise, the representatives from both sides exchanged pleasantries, but Jonathan's focus was entirely on Alfara. He could feel her presence beside him, unwavering and steady, as if she were the anchor holding everything in place. He had come to realize that despite the vast difference in their species, in their worlds, they shared something deeper, something that transcended all the politics, all the negotiations. They shared a bond. As the proceedings continued, Jonathan spoke when it was his turn, his voice steady and strong. He had rehearsed his words 1,000 times, but now, in this moment, they flowed from him naturally. He spoke of Earth's desire for peace, for a future where both species could thrive. He spoke of trust, of understanding, of the importance of working together. Althera's eyes never left him as he spoke. Her gaze was focused, but there was something else in it, something that went beyond the words. She was listening, truly listening, not just to his words, but to his thoughts, to his heart. And in that moment, Jonathan felt the depth of her understanding. She wasn't just hearing him. She was with him, every step of the way. When it was her turn to speak, Althara stood, her posture regal, her voice clear and commanding. She spoke of the Zelian Empire's commitment to peace, to ensuring that the future would be one where both Earth and the Zelians could grow together. Her words were powerful, full of the wisdom that only someone who had lived through centuries of history could possess. But it wasn't just her words that struck Jonathan. It was the way she spoke them. There was no doubt in her voice, no hesitation. She believed in what she was saying, and Jonathan believed in her. The negotiations continued, and as the discussions drew to a close, it was clear that both sides were on the verge of agreement. Jonathan had no doubt that the treaty would be signed, but there was still one final hurdle to cross. The last part of the agreement required mutual understanding between the two parties, an oath that both Earth and the Zelian Empire would commit to upholding peace, no matter the challenges that lay ahead. Jonathan turned to Alfara, meeting her gaze. There was no need for words between them now. They had already made their decision. Both of them. Together they would stand side by side and commit to this peace, to this new future. As the final signatures were written, the room fell silent. Jonathan felt a wave of emotion wash over him. This was it, the moment that would define the rest of his life, the moment that would change the course of history. Althara's hand rested lightly on his, a small but significant gesture. Jonathan looked at her, and for the first time he realized something. It wasn't just the treaty that was important. It was the connection they had built. The trust. The understanding. Everything they had shared in these past few days had been more than just negotiation. It had been the beginning of something new, something he couldn't yet name, but felt deep within his heart. As the treaty was signed, the Zelian representatives and Earth's delegates exchanged nods of agreement, and the tension in the room lifted. But for Jonathan, the moment wasn't just about the treaty. It was about the bond that had been formed, the trust that had been earned. He had come here to ensure Earth's survival, but what he had found was something more. He had found a future. One that was filled with possibility, with hope. When the ceremony was over, Jonathan stood, his hand still resting in Althara's. She turned to him, her violet eyes glowing softly in the light. "We have done it," she said, her voice a quiet celebration. Jonathan nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle in his chest. "We have," he agreed. "But this is just the beginning." Althara smiled, a smile that held both wisdom and warmth.
"Yes, it is. Together, we will shape the future."
And as they walked out of the grand chamber side by side, Jonathan knew that this was only the first step in a journey that would change everything. The treaty was only a part of it. The real challenge lay ahead, building the trust and understanding between their people, ensuring that the peace they had just forged would last. But with Althara by his side, Jonathan knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. For the first time, he felt truly at peace. He wasn't just a diplomat anymore. He was part of something bigger, a future where Earth and the Zillions could thrive together. And in that future, there was no fear, no walls, only the promise of what they could accomplish side by side.